It is a challenge when you're presenting for kids, and most of what I do is for adults. But when I present for kids, the ones that I most often do for children are Amelia Earhart and Clara Barton. And I do Clara Barton specifically in her Civil War days because I have a background in Civil War history, and I'm a member of the Chicago Civil War Roundtable, so I'm interested in that particular aspect of her. But it's interesting when I do Amelia Earhart, because Amelia Earhart is this fascinating historical character that is incredibly known and a role model both for adults and for children, which always fascinates me. When I do a character, I always go to the library and I look to see what books about this character are there in the children's section, and what books about this character are there in the adult section. And interestingly, with Clara Barton, there have only been a few full-length adult monographs about her, and she doesn't show up typically in Civil War history other than as a kind of a footnote. She's not the subject of major attention, although there's a recent book that puts her there. But when you look at children's books, there are a slew of children's books about Clara Barton, which really does suggest she's very much seen as a role model for children. There might be one or two children's books about Eleanor Roosevelt, and then a whole ton of adult books about her. Amelia Earhart is one of the rare characters that she has been written about as much for an adult audience as for a children's audience, which is somewhat unique. And she's the one character I do that when I show up for children, I have a lot of kids come up and tell me, oh, I dressed as her for Halloween. This is funny. I just did Amelia Earhart last night. And I got an email late last night from a woman who said me and my 8-year-old daughter watched your program last night. And my 8-year-old daughter was just enthralled. She loves Amelia Earhart. And then we went on your website, and now she wants to do what you do, which was so incredibly touching and interesting. And so I'm always really careful when I do Amelia Earhart, because I know what a special place she has in so many people's hearts. It is such a responsibility to enact Amelia Earhart, because I want to make sure that people know she really does. She really was deep down an amazing, inspiring person. When I've thought about doing characters who have warts, I always have to think about it carefully, because my role is not to go out there and crush dreams, but I don't think that the whole role of biography is solely and only to create role models. I think part of the value of history is, revealing that not everybody, was entirely perfect. The first villain that I have done is Lizzie Borden, which I just debuted this year. I started working on her, and it was because I didn't really have a villain. And it's maybe the hardest character I've ever done, because I don't want to set her up as a role model. But the reality is that she was found not guilty. The mystery of who killed her parents remains unsolved to this day. I have my own opinions about it. Right. But when you're presenting this person, people are going to make value judgments, and we always do, right? I don't want to present her as a too sympathetic character, but I also don't want to present her as an unsympathetic character. The reality is she fell somewhere in between. It's been surprisingly well received. It creates a great deal of discussion, which is what I was really hoping for. Sometimes I have to nudge it and say, and talk about how good a liar she might or might not have been. We'll never know. I mean, who knows what's really inside anyone's heart, especially that woman's. I don't want the audience to take everything she says at face value. And that's hard, because a lot of times when you feel like this historical person is in front of you, you want to take everything they say at face value.
One of the members of our board, this John Roeder, is a reenactor, and he did John Adams.
I saw that. I
Oh,
just
good.
watched it last week. Yeah, I was on. Yeah, yeah.
I really liked.
Mm,
I was very provoked by the idea of this,
yeah,
who knows what isn't it lurking in anyone's head and
yeah,
why,
yeah,
but breaking down, separate mob
yeah,
uh, reaction from actually the facts on the ground.
yeah,
Um, and especially since John Adams, would be able to evolve into someone who could be a revolutionary.
yeah,
He could be a Brit
yeah,
until he could no longer be a Brit. And I love that about
yes,
what you all do.
yeah.
You provoke the reconsideration of how the institutions need to be on.
Yes. You know what? I was just going to say something on that. What I loved about what he did was that when I finished up, my husband teaches history. He teaches political science and history at a community college. Um, and as soon as we finished up, because he knows history really well,
Yeah.
so we had this really great discussion about John Adams' place in history and that whole idea of, taking on the defense of someone that not everybody around you is going to think these people are even worthy of being defended, but because you think it is so critical to our nation that everybody gets defense, everybody gets their moment, everyone is innocent until proven guilty, that is paramount even more than your own personal feelings. And we had a really interesting discussion about what that means in American democracy today. And I thought, God, that's what great Chautauqua can do. I always want to remind myself when I tackle a new character, I always like to think about now,
Mhm.
what do I want people to be talking about when they finish? What are the moments or the quotes or the issues raised that I want them to, I was at a museum once, and the woman who was talking about the education program, she said, I always think about what's the discussion in the car going home.
I wonder, has anyone done Atticus Finch?
Wait, that's a good question. I don't know. It'd be a great character to do.
Yes. Do you
Yeah.
want to do it in drag? I think you'd be fabulous.
But you know what? That's actually a really good point. I'm just working right now on a lecture because I do lectures as well as portrayals. And there's a senior center in the Chicago area that's doing a whole series on race. And someone asked if I did anything specifically related to issues of race in history. And I said, well, some of the characters I do, absolutely, but I'm not comfortable stepping into someone who is another race from mine.
Mhm.
But there's this very interesting book that just came out, maybe 3 years ago, about Ona Judge, who was an enslaved woman at Mount Vernon. She was one of George Washington's household, and he actually took her to Philadelphia. She ran away and was never caught. She went to New Hampshire, lived 50 years as a fugitive. The book itself is I think masterful because just finding evidence of this woman's, she was a fugitive, right? So her whole life was about not being out there. And this woman tracked down her marriage certificate and the death notice of her husband. It's amazing. But also what it means about how you write history of a person who was so committed to keeping themselves. Unfortunately, this woman gave 2 interviews near the end of her life. And I thought really hard because I think this is such an important life story. Ona Judge's name should be as well known as Harriet Tubman or Frederick Douglass, but we don't have material evidence, right? You can go to the Museum of African American History and see Harriet Tubman's shawl or Nat Turner's Bible. She didn't leave any of that. She didn't write a slave narrative the way Frederick Douglass did. So we can't go to the store and read her story. So how do we work to keep her story out there? So I'm doing a lecture about her as part of my work to do it. But I keep thinking it is so much the kind of story that would work really well. And I know there are some people who do reenactments of Ona Judge, which I'm really grateful for. Unfortunately, they're not in the Chicago area,
Yeah.
but it's one of those areas where I think historical portrayals can do a real service to history by
Mhm.
bringing these characters to life.